Gangsters were bullying a woman in a wheelchair until 10 fighters from the U.S. Navy SEALs Special Forces appeared. At one of the corner tables, near the wide front window, sat a woman in her late 20s. Her hair was tied back, her posture elegant despite the wheelchair. She maneuvered with practiced ease. A small book rested in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in several minutes. She was simply enjoying the sunshine, the sound of plates clinking, and the soft hum of life around her. That peace didn't last. The cafe doors swung open with a metallic squeak, and the sudden sound of heavy boots scraped against the floor. 5 men entered, their swagger loud enough to silence half the conversations. They wore leather jackets, gold chains glinting in the light, and smirks that carried both arrogance and menace. Local gangsters, everyone in town knew them. They didn't just want coffee. They wanted control. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, scanned the room as if it all belonged to him. His gaze landed on the woman by the window. Slowly, a grin spread across his face, the kind of grin that promised trouble. "Well, look what we got here," he said loudly, striding toward her. Little lady rolling in like she owns the place. The cafe grew still. Eyes darted away. Some customers lowered their heads, hoping to disappear into their cups. The woman tightened her grip on the book in her lap, but kept her chin high. She didn't reply. That seemed to bother him. "You too good to answer me," he sneered, leaning down close, his shadow falling over her face. His buddies chuckled, circling like vultures. One reached out and flicked the wheel of her chair, spinning it slightly. The sound of rubber squeaking against the tile echoed in the silence. "Stop," she said firmly, her voice steady. "Leave me alone." Her words only fueled their laughter. The scarred man placed his hands on her chair's armrests, boxing her in. "What are you going to do, sweetheart? Roll away." And that's when the door opened again. The bell above it jingled, unremarkable, yet the presence that entered shifted the whole atmosphere. 10 men walked in, side by side, their steps even, calm, and purposeful. They wore plain clothes, jeans, t-shirts, jackets, but there was no mistaking their bearing. Shoulders square, eyes sharp, movements precise. The kind of presence that commanded respect without a single word spoken. The gangsters didn't notice at first, too caught up in their game. But the rest of the cafe did. Heads turned, eyes widened. There was something unmistakable about these men. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, caught the scar man's eye. His expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to thicken with authority. "Step away from her," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. The gang leader blinked, caught off guard. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" The answer came not in words, but in the way the 10 men spread slightly, instinctively forming a line, each one alert, balanced, ready. Even in civilian clothes, their postures screamed discipline, training, danger. Someone whispered from a corner booth, their voice trembling, but full of awe. "Navy SEALs." The room seemed to exhale all at once. The sunlight streaming through the window caught the edge of the scar man's face, highlighting the moment he realized he'd just picked the wrong fight. For a heartbeat, silence filled the cafe. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan above, and the clink of a spoon nervously dropped into a coffee cup. The gangsters, 5 men who strutted in like they owned the place, suddenly found themselves staring at 10 pairs of eyes that didn't flinch. The scar man tried to laugh it off. "Navy SEALs? Please, you expect me to believe that? You guys look like you walked out of some army poster." The tall SEAL who had spoken earlier didn't blink. His voice stayed calm, steady like a rock in a storm. "We don't need you to believe it. Step away from the lady." The woman in the wheelchair sat frozen, her book still clutched against her chest. She could feel the shift in the air, the difference between the cocky swagger of street thugs and the deadly quiet of men who had seen combat. Her heart pounded, but for the first time since the gangsters had closed in, she felt a strange sense of safety. One of the gangsters snorted and moved closer, puffing up his chest. "You think 10 against 5 makes you tough? We own this street. Everyone knows it." "Not today," came the reply. The SEALs didn't move aggressively. They didn't need to. Every step they took was measured, every breath timed. They had walked into the cafe like ordinary customers, but now, with subtle shifts, hands unclenching, weight settling evenly on their feet, they showed who they truly were. Predators in plain clothes. The scar man spat on the floor. "You're making a mistake. Big mistake." He leaned lower over the woman, trying to prove he still had control. "See this girl here? She's just our entertainment." He tapped the armrest of her chair, smirking. That's when one of the SEALs, a lean man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. His voice cut the air like a knife. "Touch her again, and you won't walk out of here." The gangster froze, the words slicing through his bravado. Something in the SEAL's eyes made it clear. This wasn't a bluff. The tension crackled like electricity. The other customers held their breath, some gripping their cups so tightly their knuckles turned white. But gangsters survive on reputation. Backing down wasn't in their blood. The scarred man shoved himself upright, squaring his shoulders. He motioned to his crew. "Boys, let's teach these wannabes a lesson." Chairs scraped as two of the thugs pulled bottles off nearby tables, smashing them against the counter from makeshift weapons. Another slipped a knife from his boot, flashing the blade in the sunlight. The SEALs didn't flinch. They merely shifted slightly, fanning out, forming a half circle that shielded the woman in the wheelchair. Their movements were synchronized without a single word exchanged, an unspoken language forged through years of training and missions no one else in the cafe could even imagine. The tall SEAL gave one last warning. His tone carried the weight of command, the kind of voice that made men follow orders without hesitation. "Final chance. Walk away." The scarred gangster laughed, though there was a crack in it now, a tremor beneath the bravado. "You don't scare us." The SEAL's expression hardened. "We're not here to scare you." The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Outside, sunlight gleamed on the parked cars and the bright awnings of Main Street. Inside, the storm was seconds away from breaking. The woman in the wheelchair whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Please don't fight for me." The tall SEAL glanced down at her, his gaze softening just for a moment. Then he looked back up at the gangsters, his jaw set like stone. "You don't understand," he said. "It's not a choice. We don't leave people behind." The scar man growled something under his breath, and with a sudden yell, he lunged forward, knife flashing. His men surged with him, a wave of chaos crashing into disciplined steel. And in that instant, the cafe turned into a battlefield. The scarred gangster's knife slashed forward, a streak of silver in the sunlight. But before the blade got anywhere near the woman in the wheelchair, the tall SEAL shifted. One step, one twist of the wrist, and the knife was gone, clattering harmlessly to the floor. The move was so fast the gangster didn't even realize he'd been disarmed until his own hand was empty. The cafe erupted. Chairs toppled, cups shattered, people screamed. Some customers ducked under tables, others scrambled for the door. But the SEALs didn't waver. They moved like a single machine, 10 men flowing in motion, each covering the other, each precise. One thug swung a broken bottle at a SEAL's face. The SEAL slipped aside, caught the man's wrist, and guided his momentum straight into a table edge. The bottle shattered against wood, useless, and the thug collapsed with a grunt. Another came with a chair raised high, trying to smash it down on the woman's wheelchair. But 2 SEALs were already there, blocking his path. One caught the chair mid-swing, snapping it out of the man's hands, while the other drove a clean strike into his chest, dropping him to the ground, gasping for air. The scarred leader roared with rage, throwing punches wild and furious. But each one met empty air. The tall SEAL parried, redirected, and finally let one strike land, his own. It wasn't flashy. It was a precise hit to the ribs that sent the gangster stumbling backward, wheezing, eyes wide with shock. The woman sat frozen, heart hammering. She couldn't move, couldn't help, but she watched as the men who had walked in quietly, calmly, now dismantled the bullies with frightening efficiency. They weren't brutal, not reckless. Every movement was controlled. They weren't fighting to kill. They were fighting to protect. 2 thugs tried to rush together, hoping to overwhelm. A SEAL sidestepped the first, grabbed his jacket, and flung him straight into the path of the second. The 2 collided, crashing into a table that splintered beneath their weight. Coffee and glass spilled across the floor. "Enough!" the scarred leader shouted, though his voice cracked with desperation. He looked around and saw his men sprawled across the cafe floor, groaning, disarmed, beaten. The customers who had dared peek out from their hiding spots stared wide-eyed, some even whispering prayers under their breath. But the SEALs weren't finished. They tightened their circle around the woman's wheelchair, shielding her completely. Their eyes scanned the room, alert, ready for more. The scarred man staggered forward again, holding his ribs. His pride was bleeding worse than any wound. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You don't know who we are. We got people everywhere. You mess with us, you mess with the whole town." The tall SEAL straightened, his voice cutting through the fear like a blade. "We don't care who you are. You crossed the line when you touched her." The scarred man sneered, but the tremor in his lip betrayed him. He glanced toward the door, as if weighing his chances of escape. His men weren't getting up anytime soon. Then outside, the sound of motorcycles revved loud, guttural, menacing. The cafe windows rattled as engines roared to life. More of the gang's crew. Reinforcements. The customers gasped. A man ducked back under his table. The woman's hands tightened on the edges of her wheelchair, fear flooding back into her chest. The SEALs didn't flinch. One of them glanced toward the window, then back at the team leader. "We got company." The tall SEAL's jaw clenched. He gave a sharp nod. "Then we hold the line." Sunlight streamed through the windows, hot and bright, as the shadows of more men gathered outside. The fight inside the cafe had been quick and decisive, but the real storm was only beginning. The engines outside roared like thunder, shaking the cafe's windows. The gang's reinforcements had arrived, dozens of them. Shadows shifted across the glass as leather-clad men gathered there, silhouettes looming larger with each passing second. The quiet main street, once filled with sunshine and chatter, now bristled with menace. Inside, the SEALs held their ground. 10 men, back straight, eyes scanning every angle. They moved the woman's wheelchair closer to the center of their circle, shields of flesh and resolve surrounding her. The leader's voice was low, steady, calm in a storm. "Everyone stay down. Stay quiet. We'll handle this." Customers crouched under tables, clutching trembling hands to their mouths. The barista peeked out from behind the counter, eyes wide. A young man near the door whispered, "We're dead. They'll kill us all." But then his eyes met the tall SEALs, and something in that steady gaze stilled his panic. These men weren't panicking, not even close. The door rattled. A fist pounded against it. Then another. The scarred leader, still nursing his ribs, staggered to his feet and grinned through the pain. "See? Told you. We run this town." One of the SEALs, shorter, compact, with eyes sharp as glass, stepped closer to him. "Not today. Sit down." The scarred man snarled, but didn't dare advance. Then the door burst open. A flood of gangsters stormed in, 15, maybe 20, their boots hammering the floor. They carried chains, bats, brass knuckles, and knives. The cafe's warm, sunny air turned suffocating under the weight of tension. The SEALs didn't move until the first man charged. Then everything ignited. A chain swung wide, but a SEAL ducked, catching the attacker's arm and twisting until the chain clattered to the floor. A bat whistled through the air, but another SEAL caught it, snapping it clean in half across his knee before driving his shoulder into the thug's chest. The woman in the wheelchair watched in awe and terror. The SEALs didn't just fight, they flowed. Every step was part of a larger dance, every strike designed not just to disable, but to protect. She realized they weren't just soldiers. They were guardians, but there were so many. The cafe erupted into chaos. Tables overturned, glass shattering, the smell of spilled coffee thick in the air. A thug lunged toward the woman, slipping through a gap, but before he could reach her, a SEAL caught him with a sweeping kick that sent him sprawling into a wall. Still, the pressure mounted. For every gangster dropped, another surged forward. The SEALs held formation, but their circle grew tighter, closer. "Boss," one SEAL grunted, blocking a wild swing with his forearm. "We're going to need to end this quick." The tall leader nodded once. His eyes scanned the room, calculating. He wasn't just fighting. He was commanding, even without words. His men followed his subtle signals. A glance, a nod, a shift of weight. Within seconds, the SEALs surged together. They drove the gangsters backward, corralling them toward one side of the cafe, breaking their momentum. It wasn't brute force, it was strategy. The scarred leader shouted from behind his men, voice breaking with desperation. "What are you doing just standing there? Take them down." But the thugs hesitated. For the first time, fear cracked through their bravado. They weren't fighting baristas or students anymore. They were facing warriors. One SEAL stepped forward, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. His voice was calm, almost cold. "Walk away. This is your last chance." The gangsters muttered among themselves. Some glanced toward the door, others at their leader. The fight wasn't going the way they expected, but pride was a dangerous thing. The scarred leader spat blood onto the floor, rage twisting his face. "Nobody walks away. Finish them." The tension snapped again. The next wave of violence surged like a tide. And outside, more engines roared to life. The gang wasn't done bringing backup. The battle inside was fierce. But the war, it seemed, was only just beginning. The cafe looked like a war zone. Splintered chairs littered the floor. Shards of glass sparkled under the sunlight streaming through broken windows, and the smell of smoke from an overturned coffee machine mixed with sweat and fear. The SEALs stood steady, forming their protective circle, breathing hard but eyes sharp. Around them, groaning bodies of beaten gangsters sprawled like fallen dominoes. But outside, trouble grew thicker. The growl of engines multiplied. Motorcycles lined the street in rows. Cars screeched to a halt, their doors flung open as more gangsters poured out, carrying heavier weapons. Pipes, crowbars, even a few pistols glinting in the light. The woman in the wheelchair clutched the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. She could see shadows moving outside, blocking every exit. "They're surrounding us," she whispered. The tall SEAL crouched beside her for a second, his voice low but unwavering. "That means they're scared. And scared men make mistakes." The scarred leader, leaning against the counter, laughed hoarsely. Blood streaked his cheek, but his grin was still wide. "You Navy boys think you're untouchable? You're outnumbered, outgunned. This is our town. Nobody saves you now." The SEAL's gaze flicked to him, cold as stone. "You should have walked away when you had the chance." A loud crash shook the cafe. The gang outside had shoved a dumpster against the back door. The front entrance filled with men, blocking the sunlight, their silhouettes jagged and threatening. The cafe had become a cage. One of the SEALs murmured to the leader, "Boss, they're locking us in." He nodded. "Good. Makes it easier. They've got one way in, and we control it." The gangsters surged again, pouring through the broken door. This time, they came with fury, their numbers overwhelming. The SEALs tightened their formation. They fought not like brawlers, but like a single living weapon. Two guarded the woman directly, while the rest struck, blocked, redirected. A pistol cracked, the sharp sound splitting the air. A bullet buried into the wall inches above the woman's head. Screams erupted from the huddled customers. The SEAL protecting her immediately dove, covering her with his body. Another SEAL kicked the shooter's arm, sending the gun skittering across the tiles. The gang pressed harder, their confidence bolstered by the gunfire. Chaos surged, fists and boots and broken glass clashing with precision strikes. A SEAL took a blow to the shoulder, but used the momentum to flip his attacker into a table. Another grabbed a chain, yanking it from a thug's grip and using it to slam two men together. Through it all, the woman's heart pounded. She hated being helpless, hated being the reason these men were bleeding. She gritted her teeth, scanning the chaos. Then she saw it, the fire alarm of a red box high on the wall. Her voice cut through the noise. "The alarm. Pull it." One SEAL, mid-fight, glanced her way. Without hesitation, he drove his opponent back, lunged for the alarm, and yanked it down. A shrill siren screamed through the cafe. Lights flashed red, pulsing like a heartbeat. The sound was deafening, disorienting. Some gangsters staggered, covering their ears. Outside, People on the street began shouting, running, pulling out phones. The scarred leader's grin faltered. "You stupid. Now the cops will come." The tall SEAL stepped forward, his jaw set. Exactly. But the gangsters weren't ready to give up. If anything, the alarm pushed them toward desperation. They lunged harder, frantic to finish things before sirens arrived. The SEALs met them head-on. The café became a storm of motion, precision clashing against chaos, discipline holding against sheer numbers. And in the middle of it all, the woman in the wheelchair sat tall, her eyes locked on the SEALs. For the first time, she wasn't just scared. She was certain. These men weren't just defending her. They were defending the very idea that no one, no matter how vulnerable, gets left behind. The shrill alarm echoed through the café, bouncing off broken windows and fractured tables, spilling out into the sunny street, where people now crowded at a distance, pointing, filming, whispering in fear. The sound of police sirens was faint but growing stronger, each second bringing hope of order, but the gang wasn't waiting to be arrested. They knew time was running out, and desperation made them reckless. Outside, the engines of motorcycles and cars roared one more time as backup flooded in. The crowd gasped when nearly 30 gangsters stormed toward the café, weapons raised, shouting curses that made the air heavy with menace. Inside, the men who had already been beaten stirred weakly on the floor, some trying to crawl away, but the reinforcements had come for revenge. The SEALs stood in formation, their circle unbroken, their bodies scarred by cuts and bruises yet steady as stone. The woman in the wheelchair sat at the center, her breath shallow but her gaze fixed on them. She had seen men try to intimidate, try to harm, but never in her life had she seen men move with this kind of unshakable resolve. "Here they come," one SEAL muttered, rolling his shoulders. His knuckles were raw, blood dripping slowly, yet his eyes burned with quiet fire. The tall leader gave a single nod. "Hold the line." The door burst open and the wave hit. Chains swung through the air, bats cracked against overturned tables, knives gleamed in the sunbeams, streaking across the floor. The gangsters roared, but their noise met silence because the SEALs didn't shout. They acted. The first thug rushed forward with a crowbar. A SEAL sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted until bones snapped with a sickening crack. The weapon clattered harmlessly to the ground. Another thug leaped from a table, brandishing a knife high, only to be caught midair, flipped, and slammed so hard into the floor that the café shook. The scarred leader, still staggering from earlier blows, screamed in rage. His pride was bleeding worse than his body. He pointed toward the woman. "Take her. Drag her out." 2 gangsters obeyed, weaving through the chaos toward the wheelchair. But they didn't get close. A SEAL broke from the circle, launching himself into them with brutal efficiency. His elbow crashed into one throat. His boot swept the other's legs, sending both sprawling unconscious before they could even scream. The circle reformed instantly. Not a single gap was allowed. Still, the gang pressed harder. For every man that fell, 2 more seemed to appear. Chairs splintered, glass exploded across the floor, coffee spilled like dark blood over tiles. The café had transformed into a battlefield, the air thick with sweat, dust, and the metallic tang of blood. A pistol fired. The crack was deafening. The bullet ricocheted, shattering a light fixture overhead. Screams erupted from the huddled customers who still hadn't escaped. A SEAL immediately dove, covering the woman, shielding her with his own body. Another snapped forward, disarming the shooter with such speed the gun barely had time to fire again before it was ripped away. The leader's voice cut through the madness, calm, commanding, immovable. "Stay tight. Breathe. They'll break." And he was right. Slowly, surely the tide shifted. The gangsters, so confident in their numbers, began to falter. Their attacks turned sloppy, their eyes darting toward the sirens now wailing just outside. The flashes of blue and red lights grew brighter in the broken windows, painting the chaos in stuttering color. The scarred leader, breathing ragged, blood dripping from his split lip, charged one last time at the tall SEAL. Their clash was savage, Wild fists versus disciplined precision. The SEAL blocked, parried, and then with one final devastating strike to the chest, dropped the man flat onto the wrecked cafe floor. He didn't rise. The rest of the gang hesitated. The courage drained from their faces. Sirens screamed louder. Police cars screeched to a halt outside. Officers shouting commands, weapons raised. The gangsters scattered. Some fled through the broken doorway. Others bolted through smashed windows, scrambling into the daylight like rats. A few tried to drag their wounded, but most abandoned them, fear devouring their loyalty. The SEALs did not pursue. They stood steady, bloodied, but undefeated, their circle around the woman still intact. The cafe fell silent except for the moans of the fallen. The battle was over, but its weight lingered like smoke in the air. The cafe was a ruin, splintered tables, shattered glass glittering under the sun, walls scarred with bullet holes and blood. Yet in the center sat the woman in her wheelchair, alive, untouched, protected by 10 men who refused to let her fall. The SEALs stood around her, bloodied and bruised, but steady, breathing hard yet unshaken. When the police burst in, weapons drawn, they froze at the sight. Gangsters sprawled across the floor, incapacitated, while 10 silent figures stood like guardians carved from stone. "Cuff them," the captain barked. Officers moved quickly, dragging the scarred leader away in chains. His empire of fear had collapsed in a single afternoon. The woman's voice trembled as she looked at the tall SEAL. "Why? You didn't even know me." He crouched to her level, his face softening. "Because you were alone, and we don't leave people behind." Her throat tightened, tears spilling freely, not from fear but relief. She clutched the book in her lap, unable to find words strong enough for gratitude. The SEALs turned and walked out into the sunlight. Townspeople lined the sidewalks, silent, filming, whispering. No cheers, no applause, only awe. 10 men had come and left as they always did, quietly, steadily, with purpose. For the woman in the wheelchair, they were more than protectors. They were proof that even in the darkest moments, courage stands, loyalty acts, and some will always refuse to walk away.